I never thought painting a gate could start a full-blown war. But there I was, standing on my driveway, paintbrush in hand, staring at the old, rusty metal gate that had seen better days. It was crooked, peeling, and honestly kind of sad, like it was begging for a second chance, and I was ready to give it one. I decided on a bright, bold blue, not sky blue, not navy, something that screamed, "I own this property and I'm alive." I stepped back after the first coat and smiled, imagining how the morning sun would catch it, making my tiny farm look like something out of a storybook. I didn't notice her at first. That is, until I heard the unmistakable screech of tires across the street. There she was, Karen, my HOA president. The woman could spot a minor violation from 3 blocks away, and apparently a gate color that wasn't beige counted. She got out of her SUV like she was storming a castle, clipboard in hand, eyes narrowed, lips pressed together like she was planning the downfall of a kingdom. I waved. She didn't wave back. In fact, she didn't even blink. She just stood there, staring at my blue gate like I had personally insulted her family for generations. That's when it hit me. This wasn't going to be a polite conversation. This was a confrontation, and somehow I was the villain. I went back to my painting, trying to ignore her. Each stroke of the brush felt like a tiny act of rebellion. It was absurd, really. I mean, it's just a gate. Yet the tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. The next morning, a letter appeared, slipped neatly under my door. I opened it cautiously, almost expecting confetti or a threatening note written in blood. Instead, it was worse, an HOA letter. Cold, precise, dripping with authority. It declared my blue gate unacceptable and demanded I repainted a more appropriate color. Beige, classic beige. The kind of color that screams, I conform, I obey, I live without personality. I laughed nervously, out loud. I read it again and again, imagining Karen tiptoeing around my yard with a measuring tape, judging every inch of my fence. The absurdity almost made me forget the dread creeping up my spine. Almost. But she didn't stop at the letter. The next morning she was back, parked at the end of my driveway like a hawk surveying its prey. I could see the anger radiating off her in visible waves. She was muttering to herself, and I swear I heard her say something about fines, penalties, and community standards. My neighbors peeked from their windows, some whispering, some clearly holding back their laughter. I wanted to step outside and explain. It's just paint, nothing more. But something in her eyes told me that reasoning with Karen was like trying to explain quantum physics to a cat. She didn't do reason, she did authority, and she was coming for me. I stood on the porch, gripping my coffee mug like a lifeline, trying to calm the panic and the absurdity twisting in my gut. Every fiber of my being told me this was going to escalate. And deep down, a small, stubborn part of me, maybe the part that bought a bright blue gate instead of beige, was secretly excited. Because if she was going to make this personal, I wasn't planning to back down. I just didn't yet know how far she would go, or how far I would have to go in return. I thought maybe Karen would calm down after seeing my blue gate for a few days. Maybe she'd realize it wasn't a personal attack, just a splash of color on my property. I was wrong. The next morning, a letter appeared on my porch. I knew it was coming before I even opened it. The crisp envelope, perfectly folded, and that faint scent of authority, like someone had polished it with bureaucracy. I tore it open and immediately knew this wasn't going to be a simple warning. The words inside were sharp, deliberate, and dripping with self-importance. Your gate color is a violation of the community aesthetic guidelines. Immediate action is required. Failure to comply will result in fines, legal action, and further escalation. I read it again slowly, making sure I hadn't misread. Nope, that's exactly what it said. I couldn't help it. I laughed, out loud, not the polite chuckle of someone amused, but a full-throated laugh of disbelief. This was absurd. My neighbors probably thought I'd lost it. Who finds someone over paint, over a color? And yet here I was, officially the enemy of the HOA, simply for choosing blue over beige. And then the kicker. She ended the letter with a flourish of authority I could practically hear in her voice. I will be visiting your property personally to inspect this violation. My stomach sank. Not tomorrow, not next week, today. By mid-morning, I saw her car creeping down the street. The way she drove made it clear she wasn't just coming to talk, she was coming to enforce. I could almost hear the imaginary marching band playing her theme song, The War of Beige and Blue. When she stepped out, clipboard in hand, I couldn't help but notice how ridiculously overprepared she looked. I half expected her to pull out a tape measure and a magnifying glass. She approached my gate like a general inspecting a battlefield. I waved casually, trying to act nonchalant. She didn't wave back. Instead, she gave me the kind of glare that could melt steel. "Your gate," she began, voice sharp and precise, "violates community standards. It must be corrected immediately." I raised my eyebrows. Corrected how? With magic paint that changes itself. She didn't flinch. "We have rules, you will comply." I could feel the absurdity of the situation weighing on me. Here I was, standing on my own property, being scolded like a child for daring to like the color blue. My inner voice screamed, just tell her to go away, just ignore her. But something deeper, stubborn and alive, refused. I decided to push back cautiously, carefully. "I see," I said, my voice calm but firm. "But I live here, not you, and I actually like my gate this way. Maybe it adds personality to the street." Her eyes narrowed further. I didn't even know that was possible. "Personality is irrelevant. Compliance is mandatory. You will repaint or face consequences." I laughed again, quieter this time, but I could see the tension building, not just in me, but in her. Neighbors were peeking from windows, trying not to giggle. I felt a small surge of courage. Maybe, just maybe, I wasn't alone in this fight. Then she did something that made my blood run cold. She took out her phone. I assumed she was calling the HOA office, maybe even the police. My heart thumped. My mind raced. I knew I had to be ready for whatever came next. "I'll be back," she said sharply, her words cutting through the morning air like a blade. "Tomorrow, and next time I will not be alone." And just like that, she was gone. Her car disappeared around the corner, but the shadow of her threat lingered like a storm cloud. I sank onto my porch, gripping my coffee mug like it was a lifeline. The absurdity, the humor, the dread, all of it tangled together in my chest. I was facing an uphill battle I hadn't asked for, but deep down, a stubborn fire had been lit. This wasn't just about paint anymore. This was about standing my ground, no matter how ridiculous the fight seemed. And I had a feeling that tomorrow, when Karen came back with her reinforcements, nothing would ever be the same. The next morning, I woke up to a quiet sense of dread that felt heavier than my old tractor. My gate gleamed in the sunlight, bright, bold, and defiant, almost as if it knew the war was about to begin. I sipped my coffee slowly, telling myself to stay calm. But deep down, I knew that calm was a lie. It didn't take long for the sound of tires crunching on gravel to shatter the morning peace. I looked up and sure enough, Karen was back. But this time, she wasn't alone. Her SUV was followed by 2 more cars, and from them emerged what could only be described as a small battalion of HOA enforcers, clipboards, measuring tapes, and frowns at the ready. I stepped onto the porch, gripping my mug like a shield. My heart pounded, part excitement, part fear. I knew this wasn't just about paint anymore. It was about power, control, and my refusal to bow to a ridiculous standard. Karen marched up the driveway, each step deliberate, each word clipped and sharp. "This gate is a violation. I've warned you. You will comply," she barked, her voice echoing across the street. I tried to stay calm. "Good morning, Karen. I see you brought friends. I hope they like blue." Her eyes narrowed so hard I thought they might actually pierce me. "This is serious," she said, waving her clipboard as if it were a sword. "The community has standards and your property must meet them." I swallowed. "I understand, but this is my home, my gate, and I like it the way it is. Do I get a say in how I decorate my own property?" Silence. You could have heard a pin drop. Even the HOA enforcers seemed unsure of how to respond. Karen's lips pressed into a tight line, and I swear, the wind held its breath along with the neighbors peeking from their windows. Then she did something that made my stomach twist. She stepped closer, clipboard raised like a shield, and said in a low, dangerous tone, "I will be back, and next time I will not be alone. You will regret ignoring this." A flicker of humor bubbled up despite the tension. Regret? I thought. Over a gate? I imagined her sneaking around at night, measuring my fence in the moonlight like some secret agent of beige justice. I couldn't help but laugh quietly, though I kept my expression neutral. But the humor couldn't mask the dread. I knew she wasn't bluffing. Karen thrived on conflict, and my blue gate had become her personal battlefield. Every step I took, every word I said, would be scrutinized and weaponized. I felt like a soldier preparing for an absurd but very real war. As she turned to leave, one of her enforcers, a man in a khaki vest with a notebook, called out, "We're documenting everything." I waved casually. "Smile for the camera, gentlemen. My gate looks great today." Her SUV screeched away, leaving me standing in the driveway, surrounded by the aftermath of tension, adrenaline, and neighborly curiosity. I could hear whispers and laughter from the windows across the street. Some were rooting for me. Some were just as fascinated by the chaos as I was. I sank onto my porch steps, my mug forgotten, and let the adrenaline fade into a mixture of relief and apprehension. Karen was gone for now, but the threat lingered. She had made it clear she would return, stronger and more determined. And I realized something vital. This wasn't just about a gate. It was about standing up for myself, for my home, and for the tiny bit of color and personality I refused to surrender. I took a deep breath and looked at my blue gate, feeling a strange mix of pride and dread. Tomorrow, I thought, she'll come back, and I have no idea what she'll bring with her. But one thing was certain: I wasn't going to repaint. Not now, not ever. The quiet of the morning settled around me, but I knew it was temporary. Like a storm gathering on the horizon, Karen's fury was coming, and I had to be ready. I thought yesterday had been intense. Karen's dramatic inspection, her clipboard waving like a tiny sword, it had been enough to make anyone nervous. But by morning, it was clear that this was only the beginning. I stepped outside, still half asleep, to find two HOA members crouched near my driveway, measuring the exact distance between my mailbox and the gate. Another was snapping photos from multiple angles, as if documenting the crime scene of the century. My coffee nearly fell out of my hand. "Good morning," I said cautiously, trying to keep my voice calm. "Can I help you?" They looked up like I was an intruder on their sacred mission. One muttered something about aesthetic compliance, and the other just shook their head solemnly, scribbling furiously in a notebook. It was like watching a bizarre ritual unfold, a ceremony of bureaucracy performed in my driveway with my blue gate at the center of it all. Then I saw her, Karen. She had returned, and this time she wasn't alone. She had backup. Two more HOA enforcers trailed behind her, clipboards raised, eyes sharp. She marched straight to the gate, inspecting every inch with an intensity I could feel in my chest. "This is unacceptable," she said, voice echoing like a gavel hitting a courtroom desk. "The color is completely inappropriate, and this will not stand." I forced a smile. "Appropriate for whom?" I asked. "The gate is mine. I live here. I think it looks fantastic." Her eyes narrowed dangerously. "Personal opinion is irrelevant. You will comply." I laughed softly, though my heart was racing. "You do realize this is just a gate, right? Not a national emergency." The humor in my voice didn't reach her. She didn't even flinch. It was like speaking to a brick wall wearing a pink blazer and carrying a clipboard. She turned to her backup, whispering, and suddenly I realized this was escalating far beyond what I had imagined. For a brief moment, I felt panic rise. They were organized, relentless, and entirely convinced they were in the right. And then a stubborn thought struck me. I didn't come this far just to let them bully me into beige conformity. I walked slowly toward the gate, measuring their movements, my mind racing. I could imagine the headlines if this went too far. "Local HOA goes to war over gate color." I let a small, defiant smirk creep onto my face. Humor, even in fear, was my ally. Karen noticed it immediately, her face twisted in fury, lips pressed tight. "This isn't a joke," she snapped. "We are documenting everything, every angle, every detail, every inch." I couldn't help but chuckle under my breath. Every inch? Really? My neighbors, peeking from windows and porches, were clearly enjoying the spectacle, trying not to laugh openly. The tension rose like a storm cloud. I could feel my pulse thudding in my ears, adrenaline tightening my chest. The situation had gone beyond letters, warnings, or polite discussions. Karen was serious, and I knew she would stop at nothing to enforce her will. And that's when it hit me. I had a secret weapon. One that Karen couldn't ignore, one that couldn't be taken away, my tractor. Sitting in the corner of the yard, old but reliable, a little dented, a little rusty, ready. I didn't move it yet. I just let my eyes linger on it, letting the thought settle in the air, almost daring Karen to cross the line. My mind raced, imagining the chaos if this showdown escalated further. Karen turned back to me, oblivious to my inner calculations. "This is not over," she said sharply. "Tomorrow I will return and you will answer for this violation." She stomped back to her car, leaving her army of clipboard wielders behind, who reluctantly followed. The SUVs drove off, leaving an eerie quiet in their wake. I exhaled, half relieved, half excited. The escalation had begun, and I knew that the next encounter would change everything. Whatever she brought tomorrow, I had a plan, or at least a very stubborn willingness to defend my blue gate. I leaned against the fence, staring at it, and whispered under my breath, "Bring it on, Karen. Tomorrow things get interesting." The night after Karen's visit, I couldn't sleep. Every creak in the house, every distant bark, even the whisper of wind through the trees felt amplified, like the universe was conspiring with my nerves to keep me on edge. My blue gate sat quietly in the driveway, gleaming under the moonlight, almost taunting me. "It's just a gate, but it's your war now." I tried to distract myself. I made coffee, walked through the house, checked emails, scrolled aimlessly on my phone. But nothing helped. The image of Karen marching up my driveway, clipboard in hand, eyes narrowed with the fury of 1,000 HOA members, was burned into my brain. I imagined the scene from every angle. What if she brought more people tomorrow? What if she tried to measure the gate again, this time with a caliper or some ridiculous, official tool? I chuckled nervously at the thought, but the humor did little to quiet the growing tension. I decided to do what any rational, sleep-deprived homeowner would do: prepare for defense. I looked around the yard and assessed my options. The hoses could be deployed, buckets set strategically, and my garden gnomes, well, they could stand as a line of moral support. Then my eyes fell on the tractor. My old, reliable, slightly dented tractor. My ally, my final line of defense. I didn't move it yet, I just stared. Sometimes imagination is the scariest weapon. I pictured Karen's face if I actually did something bold. My pulse quickened, not with fear, but with exhilaration. It felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, ready to jump, except the cliff was my driveway, and the jump involved my tractor and a very persistent HOA president. Hours passed. I tried to sleep again, but sleep wouldn't come. Every creak in the house sounded like Karen tiptoeing outside. Every shadow looked like a clipboard-wielding spy ready to report my violation. My mind raced through strategies, all ridiculous, all over the top, and all somehow completely plausible in my head. I imagined a night raid, Karen creeping up with a flashlight, whispering, "This gate must be beige," and me, in response, revving the tractor like a knight drawing a sword. My stomach tightened with nervous laughter. The image was absurd, and yet I couldn't shake it. By 2 a.m., I was packing the driveway, sipping lukewarm coffee, muttering plans to myself. If she measures again, I trailed off, not sure what the just was, but feeling the thrill of defiance building inside me. I glanced at my neighbor's windows, dark and silent. I hoped they weren't watching, but somehow I knew they probably were, imagining the upcoming showdown. The tension wasn't just mine anymore. The street itself felt alive, waiting for the next act. As the moon dipped lower, I sat on the porch, letting the cool night air wash over me. The stakes were simple yet ridiculous: a blue gate versus a beige dictatorship. But in that absurd simplicity, something else had appeared: clarity. I realized I couldn't back down. Not from Karen, not from the HOA, not even from the absurdity of the situation. This gate wasn't just wood and paint anymore. It had become a symbol of stubbornness, of individuality, and of quiet rebellion. And tomorrow would be the true test. I poured the last of my coffee, stared at the gate one last time, and whispered under my breath, "Bring it on, Karen. Whatever you bring, I'm ready." Little did I know, ready would soon involve more than just words and defiance. It would involve something much bigger, much louder, and a tractor. The sun had barely risen, and already I knew today would be different. There was a tension in the air, thick enough to taste, as if the street itself was holding its breath. My blue gate gleamed in the morning light, almost daring Karen to show up again. I sipped my coffee, trying to calm the adrenaline buzzing in my veins, but it was no use. I walked slowly toward my tractor, running my hands over the faded, dented metal. Old Betsy, as I'd come to call her, had always been reliable, a quiet companion on the farm. Today, she felt different. She felt like a weapon of justice, a shield against the absurdity that had invaded my life. I didn't start her yet. I just sat there, turning the idea over in my head. I wasn't reckless, never reckless. But Karen had pushed too far. She had made it personal. She had made it a war over a gate color. And deep down, a stubborn, defiant part of me knew this was my line in the sand. And then I saw her car. It wasn't just Karen anymore. Her SUV rolled down the street like a tank on a mission. She stepped out, clipboard in hand, and two of her enforcers followed closely behind. They looked ready for battle, or at least a battle in their own minds. I mounted the tractor slowly, making a show of it, as if nothing unusual were happening. I started the engine quietly at first, then let it idle. The rumble of metal and diesel seemed to announce my presence in a low, deliberate growl. Karen's eyes widened immediately. I swear, if looks could kill, I'd be a smoldering puddle on the driveway. "What are you doing?" she shouted, waving her clipboard as if it could stop me. I leaned casually against the wheel. "Just tending to my property," I said. My voice was calm, almost casual. But inside, my heart was racing. Every neighbor who could see from their windows was holding their breath. Some were laughing quietly. Some were ready to call the local news. "Your gate," she snapped, "must be repainted immediately. This is an enforceable violation." I smiled faintly. "I like it blue," I said, simple, defiant, truthful. Her jaw tightened. "This is not a joke, I will not." I pressed the pedal slightly. Betsy moved forward slowly, deliberately, just a few feet. Not reckless, just enough to get her attention. Karen froze. Her clipboard wobbled in her hands. The two enforcers behind her stepped back instinctively, as if realizing for the first time that I wasn't bluffing. The street was quiet now, every neighbor watching, cameras hidden or not, recording every second. I could feel the adrenaline, the tension, the absurdity of it all wrapping around me like a cloak. I imagined the headlines. "Local farmer defends blue gate with tractor." The thought made me grin. Karen sputtered, trying to regain control. "Move that tractor away, this is harassment." I kept it slow. I kept it deliberate. Just a few more feet closer. Enough to make her uncomfortable, enough to assert that my property, my rules, and my gate were non-negotiable. And then the moment froze. She stopped, staring at me like a general finally realizing she might have underestimated her opponent. The tension was unbearable. A single step forward could have broken the fragile standoff. But I didn't move further. Not yet. I let my voice cut through the silence, calm but steady. "Ever hear of property rights?" Karen blinked. For a second, the furious, all-knowing aura of the HOA president faltered. The enforcers shifted uncomfortably. And the neighbors across the street? Some laughed quietly, others whispered excitedly. Then she did something I hadn't expected. She muttered under her breath, "This isn't over," and stormed back to her SUV, dragging her enforcers along. Tires screeched, engines roared, and just like that, the standoff ended for now. I let out a deep breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Betsy idled quietly in the driveway, like a warrior who had done her job without striking a blow. My blue gate gleamed in the sunlight, victorious in its own quiet way. But deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. Karen had been humiliated, at least in my eyes, and she would return. Whatever she brought next, I had a feeling things were only going to escalate. And I had Betsy, my tractor, and a stubborn streak a mile wide, ready for whatever came next. The day after the tractor incident, the neighborhood was buzzing like a beehive. Word had spread, quietly but fast, that I had faced down Karen and her HOA enforcers with nothing more than a tractor and a stubborn blue gate. Some neighbors whispered admiration. Others shook their heads, muttering about escalating chaos. And me? I couldn't help but grin. But there was no time to celebrate. Karen was back. She rolled into the driveway in her SUV, clipboard in hand, and this time she wasn't alone. She brought the big guns, 3 more enforcers, all armed with clipboards, measuring tools and expressions that screamed they had been personally recruited for this mission. I was already on Betsy, my tractor, the engine humming quietly under me. The blue gate behind me gleamed in the sunlight like a beacon of defiance. I watched her approach, each step deliberate, each glance sharp, like she was planning the next move in a high-stakes chess game. "You," she barked, pointing at me with the authority of someone who believed the universe revolved around beige conformity. "This ends today. You will repaint that gate, or I will escalate this to the fullest extent of the HOA. I leaned casually on the tractor, pretending to stretch, but every muscle in my body was ready. Calm, measured, defiant, I had learned the art of suspense, of timing, of standing firm. "I'm listening," I said. "Explain to me how enforcing a color on a gate benefits anyone." Her jaw tightened. "It doesn't matter, you're in violation, you will comply, do you understand me?" I nodded slowly. "Crystal clear, but here's the thing, you can't enforce personality, Karen, you can't fine individuality, and you sure as hell can't scare me off my own property." Her face went red. I could see it, practically steaming. The neighbors across the street peeked from behind curtains, cameras ready, holding their breaths. The air itself seemed to hold still, waiting. Karen muttered something under her breath and took a step closer. The enforcers shifted nervously. I shifted Betsy slightly forward, just enough to make my point clear without actually moving aggressively. A few feet. Not reckless, but enough to let her know that I wasn't afraid. "Move that tractor," she snapped. "This is harassment." I let out a slow, deliberate laugh. Harassment or precaution? Time seemed to slow. The sun caught the blue gate just right, casting a glare that reflected off my sunglasses. Karen froze mid-step, caught between outrage and disbelief. I could see the tiny panic in her eyes, the first crack in her armor. Neighbors leaned out their windows, holding their phones, recording the standoff in silence. A few whispered, "He's actually standing up to her." Karen turned abruptly, muttering under her breath, dragging her enforcers toward the SUVs. Her exit was hasty, her composure shattered. She didn't scream, she didn't threaten further, not yet. But the tension lingered like smoke in the air, heavy and palpable. I sat on Betsy, heart pounding, adrenaline still rushing, staring after her retreating SUV. The blue gate behind me seemed to shimmer with approval, like it had been waiting for this moment. I couldn't help but let out a laugh, half relief, half disbelief. This wasn't just about a gate anymore. It was about standing up for what was mine, about refusing to let absurd rules dictate my life. And in that quiet moment, I realized something crucial. Karen had underestimated me. She had underestimated my stubbornness, my humor, and yes, my tractor. I exhaled slowly, feeling a sense of victory, though I knew this was only temporary. Karen would return. She always did. But for now, I had won the battle, if not the war. I wiped a bead of sweat from my forehead, glanced at Betsy, and whispered, "Good job, old girl. We made our point today." The street seemed to settle around me, neighbors retreating to their homes, whispers and laughter fatting. But somewhere in the distance, I could almost hear the gears turning in Karen's mind. The fight wasn't over. And I knew when she came back again, it would be with a vengeance. But whatever she brought, I was ready. Because sometimes, standing up for yourself requires courage, a little humor, and a tractor. The day after the standoff, the street felt different. You could sense it in the way neighbors peeked out their windows, the subtle nods and smirks as they passed by. Word had spread about the blue gate, the tractor, and Karen's retreat, and suddenly I wasn't just a homeowner anymore. I was a legend in my own driveway. But I didn't let myself relax. Karen could return at any moment, clipboard in hand, her army of enforcers in tow. I spent the morning checking Betsy, the tractor, ensuring she was ready for anything. I walked past the blue gate slowly, running my hand over its freshly painted surface. It gleamed like a trophy, a tiny, ridiculous, defiant trophy. Around mid-morning, I saw her car down the street. My stomach tightened for a moment, but then I noticed something different. She didn't storm up the driveway this time. She slowed, looked at the gate, and then drove past. No yelling, no clipboard threats, no dramatic gesturing, just silence. I stared, disbelief washing over me. Could it be that she'd given up? The day passed slowly, each hour stretching like taffy. I kept an eye on the driveway, waiting for a final blow, some last-ditch attempt to enforce her beige obsession. But nothing came. The street remained quiet. The neighbors, I imagined, were watching, waiting for the next episode of the HOA Wars, Blue Gate Edition. By afternoon, I allowed myself a small smile. The War of the Gate, at least for now, was over. Karen and her enforcers had retreated. My property, my rules, my Blue Gate, all had survived. I walked down the driveway and leaned against Betsy, feeling the warmth of the sun on my back. Humor bubbled up in me because the whole situation was so absurd. A full-blown battle over paint color, neighbors peeking from their windows, and me sitting on a tractor like some kind of Blue Gate vigilante. I laughed out loud, the sound echoing down the street. And yet beneath the humor there was a quiet sense of triumph. This wasn't just about color. It was about standing up for yourself, even when the world, or in this case, the HOA, tries to force you into conformity. It was about stubbornness, courage, and refusing to be bullied over something as simple as a personal choice. Later that evening, I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sunlight catch the edges of the gate. It shone brilliantly, like a beacon of small victories, of individuality, of defiance. I couldn't help but feel proud. My neighbors stopped by, some to congratulate me, others just to gawk. There were chuckles, whispers, and even a few light-hearted jabs about Betsy the tractor and the infamous Blue Gate. For a brief moment, I let myself relax, imagining the absurdity of the situation. A gate had become a symbol of courage. A tractor had become a shield. And I had learned something important. Sometimes you have to take a stand, even when it seems ridiculous. Even when it seems small. Even when it's just a gate. And Karen, she would no doubt return with some new plan, some new rule, some fresh indignation. But for now, she had been bested. The Blue Gate remained, bright and bold, and I had survived the storm with humor intact, my dignity surprisingly unscathed. I took a final sip of coffee and looked at Betsy, resting quietly in the driveway. "We did good today," I whispered. "We really did." The street settled into evening calm, the laughter of children drifting faintly from nearby yards, neighbors slowly retreating indoors. And I felt a strange sense of peace. The battle was won, the absurdity endured, and the Blue Gate, my tiny act of rebellion, stood proud and unyielding. Sometimes, I thought, victory doesn't come from grand gestures or epic battles. Sometimes it comes from a little stubbornness, a little humor, and the courage to say, "This is mine, and I will defend it," even if it's just a gate. And with that, I leaned back, letting the warm glow of the setting sun wash over me, Betsy, and my Blue Gate. For now, the neighborhood was quiet, the war paused, and life, just for a moment, felt perfectly, wonderfully absurd. You've heard this confession, now wait until you hear the next one. The truth that shatters everything you thought you knew.